the question now is, boys, we've got two teams we can talk about here. I think we actually do the SK side first of all, because I feel like amazing coming from a coaching background, being a jungler, like wicked, just looking at the team on the outside. Like, this is one where there's other moves. Like, I think the Fnatic one's very interesting. There's reasons why they might do it on this one. This one, to me, I've even had, like, people on the show try to make cases. Like, the guy from SK Inner Flame was on our show explaining why they did this move. And even though, like, look, I can understand the reasons you're saying, something about these moves is off to me, mate. Like, because it's two massive moves at the same time. And I'm talking massive. You jungle support. You're not only taking your support and saying their logic is apparently you made Challenger with like jungle or whatever so he can do it. They're taking their support player and making him a jungler. And then you bring in your coach, who, did used to play support a couple of years ago. You're bringing him just straight back into active play at the beginning of summer split when everyone else had a year to warm up. So it's not just one move. It's like two massive impacts to the team potentially. So amazing. Start me off on this one. Like, what do you think about these moves? You pick which order you want to go in on them.
I think they're just terrible. I think that's what it is. I mean, SK looked pretty fine in the early game. I also gotta take that perspective, right? They looked fine in the early game. They fell apart in mid-late game. Like, I think they had two early game leads. I think they were up 4K against Misfits too. Like, they were up a decent amount, right? So it doesn't seem like that Treats is a bad early game jungler. I don't want to paint him as such. Like, he's definitely doing his job, and I think Justice also understands like how to engage. But it's like, how is it possible? How is it possible that you ever first of all come into that situation? But that's like, again, something else, you know. But it's also like, what are you telling? I mean, 2 hours look pretty good, but it's more about what are they trying to achieve with this? You know, like, are they trying to win the LEC? Is that what they're trying to do? Are they trying to win the playoffs? Because they definitely looking to have any kind of synergy come mid to late game. So I don't know how that's possible when you have like a coach and you have a support who was top 3 support last split turning jungler right now. Like, how do you fall apart mid to late game? So I don't understand how that's possible while you're winning the early game. Like, it should be the other way around. You should fall apart early game and win mid to late game scenarios. So that's the only thing I don't quite understand, if you have so many smart players as people are, or as it's being said, you know? Like, but that's my take. I don't know how it's twisted, because they looked fine in the early game. It just feels like going 0-3 with that lineup at that very point in time when you start the season with is terrible, and it's not going to do them any good for the future, because I don't see them improving throughout the split.
Wicked.
So I agree with that, with everything Amazing said. One thing I want to mention, though, is we're talking about the matchup specifically, right? And I feel like Vitality's big problem is the bot lane. They tend to overextend. They're very good mechanically, but they tend to make misplays, right? Now, we have SK with a super weak bot lane, in my opinion. It's one of the weakest bot lanes in the LEC. And this is the perfect matchup for Vitality, because their weakness is covered now, and they get a really easy game from my perspective. And if they lose, I'm going to be extremely surprised. So I don't think it makes any sense, as Amazing said, to swap out the players. I think Treats actually looked quite decent. I'm surprised about that. But one thing I also want to mention is I don't think he was challenged in the games, right? He wasn't pressured super hard. So that's one thing to look out for. We still need to see a lot more from Treat before we actually know if he's good or not.
Yeah, I'm really wondering what's going to happen if, and I think that's probably what speaks to the matchup, right? Like, I mean, Vitality obviously didn't look that good either in week 1, and again, I expected them also to start stronger because of the fact that they had a decent amount of preparation and hype around them. I think both the teams are kind of like antithesis to one another. Like, I mean, SK is good in the early game. They seem to be doing quite fine, but then fall apart in the mid to late game. And so far, the only Vitality win right now has been through a disorganized game that they kind of won. And it didn't feel like that they actually did something that warrants, how to put this, you know, like, me to even see them as like an individually strong team either. You know, it's like they're fine, but they're not great. SK is terribly, but they also like have no shot calling. So it's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like Vitality is in a position where the only way they win is through disorganized games, and SK, I guess, can only win if the enemy is like worse than them and they can somehow organize their play, because I don't see them taking over individually at all.
I think
go on. Go on.
I think one thing we have to remember is Vitality did play against Rogue and Misfits, which are 2 really good teams as well, right?
True.
So
yes,
they will look a little bit worse than they potentially are. I don't think Vitality is a top team, but I think they're a little bit better than they look.
Sorry, we'll get to Vitality in a second, right? Here we go. I'm going to do the classic Thorin move, which is where you do... I'll give everyone a secret here. Here's that secret of how it works when I do these shows. I don't actually sit around just with a whiteboard and no thoughts thinking up ridiculous jokes. What I do is when I think of the actual, like my actual analysis, I see if a joke sort of springs from that makes sense, right? So the joke in theory has to like make sense and be a joke. So here's the analysis and joke. I don't buy the whole storyline of it, even when I had the guy on who's the fucking GM or whatever, trying to explain how they did it. Because his way of explaining it was all over the place. Like, he basically made it sound like, oh, Tinks was like a good jungler and we still believe in him, but he just didn't play the style of jungle we want. And then the players said, like, you know, like they wanted Jesus to play in the team, but then Treats also plays at a challenger level on jungle, so he can go in the jungle and say, wait a minute, this chronology's all over the place, mate. If you just said to me, we didn't want Tinks, and then we were like, right, what do we do? Who else can play jungle? And then Treats is like, well, I could. And they were like, right, oh, and then I guess we have to put Jesus in. But then they just stressed the fact that like none of the players wanted Jesus because we also didn't have shot calling and like a good voice or whatever. So my problem is like some of those answers don't make sense like all at the same time. They sort of make sense individually. So I'll just say this is the joke and this is also how it's going to work. So one thing that's weird about Jesus' name, and in fact Jezu, the other player in the bot lane, is that everyone says it like that because they got to decide how you pronounce it. They say Jesus, right? But if you think about it, right, the word Jesus is written with J-E, that's G, right? So the joke I have is this: since their bot lane is Jezu and Jesus, but think about how I just changed it to how it would be said. What happened is, I know how they got Jesus into this team again. He just said to the team, look, I'm going to ask you one time, cards on the table, if I can get you the G2 bot lane, no questions asked, don't ask me any questions, would you want the G2 bot lane? And then they were like, well, of course, yeah, I mean, listen, we're all in. And then he goes, right, I'll go to management. He finished recording them. They're like, yeah, well, of course I'm in. He goes, there we go, the Jesu and Jesus, the G2 bot lane. There we go, I've got these guys in the server, and then obviously he just put himself in the game. Because I haven't a question about that, right? It's not, listen, boom, boom, whatever. It wasn't the best joke ever. It's good. The setup was a bit too long. I won't lie to you. The setup was too long. But listen, if someone could put that on 2.5 speed, probably a banger joke. Here's the question, though, right? I don't even totally hate the Treats part. I do on the angle you said, which is I thought he was actually very good in the spring, and I thought he looked like one of the best parts of their team. But the problem I have is the Jezif one, because people will know he's done this on a bunch of teams now. He's multiple times took himself back into the game, many times support, obviously, and he's always claimed it's the players who ask him to do it. And the logic is, this is why it ties in what you were giving in your analysis. The logic is supposed to be, look, he obviously isn't a top support player right now. He doesn't even play the game. So in theory, as in professionally, but obviously if you're bringing him in to be a shock, you're supposed to be a macro genius. Like, we're bringing you in. The idea is we think the other laners are all good. You're the macro genius. Come in, just tell us what to do in the mid game. We'll know what to do and we win those games instead of, being like just a playoff team. Because I was told by the Inner Flame guy, they didn't do this, just to test out players and see how the year goes. This was supposed to be like the gamble to win the LEC or to go to Worlds or something. So does anyone have any thoughts on this, like Jesus himself coming back into the game and putting himself in as the coach?
So these are my thoughts. If I was a player on that team and my coach wanted to start playing, I'd be like, what the hell is going on? You're supposed to trust your coach for everything, right? As a player. And you're supposed to be able to share absolutely everything with him at all points. And if there's a chance that your coach is gunning for your job, that's extremely weird to me. And I wouldn't feel comfortable in that situation at all. And I don't think any player should ever feel comfortable with Jesus as a coach afterwards, because it's just weird to me.
It's also like how they came to the idea. So, I mean, to kind of give you like historic reference, at least like last year, we actually had a situation where Razork had like wrist issues, right? So I had to actually sub in for some scrims. And when I did that, like, it definitely subverted like people's belief in Razork. And that didn't mean because I was like particularly good or whatever. It just meant like that I had a different angle of playing, and suddenly certain people were allowed to be a bit better, and whereas others took a step backwards. So obviously the players that like I supported, basically like pushed and allowed to be better because of my playstyle, they suddenly were like, oh man, maybe this. Oh, this is interesting to me. This is interesting to me. Like, obviously this didn't continue and didn't get into anything, but that's something that can happen, right? That if you push yourself in, suddenly like you subvert the expectations, subvert like the belief in other teammates, because you're giving them a different perspective, giving them a different kind of like aspect to the game. So it's, for me, it feels really, I don't want to say disgusting, but it is disgusting to my estimation to actually like even put yourself in that situation where you then are like, oh yeah, I don't mind playing, I'm just gonna go play, like that should never happen. Like, if it gets to that point where you're considered a potential like replacement, or you consider yourself a potential replacement, then multiple errors happen beforehand, and that's one, you must have done something to subvert the belief in another player. That's one thing. 2, you must have like really pushed for it in some kind of way, because you can just say no at any point. I can just be like, no, I don't want to play. I'm the coach. That's another thing. And third, like the management has to be on board with that, and I don't understand that either. So there are 3 things that are kind of really odd about the situation. It's not like he came out of retirement like after like half a split or whatever, similar, like was like, okay, I'm gonna do this now. He has been technically in retirement for quite some time, right? So him actually getting back to that spot makes me, yeah, as you put it, uncomfortable, and I don't think it should ever happen unless he's clear-cut the best choice by far, and they tested all the other options. That's the only situation in which I can see that happening.
I feel like even in that situation, right, if you're a coach, if you're a player that becomes a coach, you shouldn't be joining the team you're coaching. You should be joining another team if you want to start playing again. I feel like joining the team you're coaching is just awkward, because how can any player ever trust him again? Like, let's be real for a second. How would you ever trust your coach if he's gunning for your job? Imagine Jad, like there's been a lot of controversy about Jad. Imagine if Jad suddenly subbed in for his jungler, right? What would you think? You'd be like, what the hell is going on?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would think that. And it's also like, what kind of ties does he have to the management at that point? It's also something you have to think about, because like the decision to put himself in is not just, was obviously done partially by him and the management together, you know? And they've been working together for quite some time now. They work together in Misfits, and now they work together in SK. Like, I don't want to call out nepotism, because I'm not obviously aware of the behind the scenes stuff. Like, I have no idea, like, if there's like really a mutual agreement between him and the players, whatever it is, you know, like that's obviously the sense they have. But it's still odd to just like to have that support from his management for quite some time, then put yourself in that situation, and suddenly like you're basically like kind of the officer that plays like soldier for a couple of weeks or what it is, and every time like someone's gonna fuck up now, you're gonna shoot him in the back of the head. That's how it feels like. That's a situation that they put themselves in, because he's now kind of like the spy inside of the game. You know, it's like, oh no, this guy is misplaying. I think we need to sit like, oh, we need another player. Get that guy out, get another one. Like, that's how it feels like, because you already made that change for yourself. You already put yourself in. Like, this is the first stepping stone to like a really odd situation, almost like, yeah, like it's like totalitarian leadership, as dumb as it sounds, because like there's no trust anymore. You have full control, and you've showcased that by putting yourself in the game.
It's also worth mentioning, in case like fans are just young and they only think like Jesus was a sport player. He used to play not only mid lane years and years ago, back when Wicked was in LEC, when it was EULCS, but also before that he was an AD carry player. So actually, if I agree, like in theory now, if I'm ever in any of his teams and I play any of those 3 roles, I get what Wicked's saying. Like, I'd have a hard time going to him as a coach and going, yeah, coach, I'm really struggling with confidence. I don't really know if my Orianna or Tristana is good enough. And then he goes like, oh, I hear you, yeah. Right, team, I'm coming in this week. I've been playing on, like, fucking what? Well, I told you that, like, because privately, you know, listen, I'm making it ridiculous, but like, you would have to at least think about it. Whereas the difference is, if your coach is like Youngbuck, you don't think he's fucking putting himself in the game, do you? Like, he's just going to coach you. Like, if you have problems, you have problems. He has to actually deal with them, you know. He can't possibly, because there's the other thing about that I didn't like, is the way they stressed the angle. I even said this on the show. They stressed the angle, like, but the players wanted to do it. Look, motherfucker, you're the coach. At the end of the day, if you didn't think it was a good idea, you'd tell them, no, we're not doing it, we're sticking with him. So you obviously did want to do it as well. So why sell the angle where it sounds like you didn't want to do this? Like, you're making it sound, oh, they asked me to. It's like, you obviously want to players, but you obviously, by the way, also think you can do it. Like, you can be like a top support. And I tell you what, I don't know if you can be as good as Streets was. I don't really buy that angle. Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.